It is Wednesday, November 24th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the Week 12 Preview Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schaub. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. And we got a goofy week this week because of Thanksgiving, of course, Jared. On Thursday, we got 3 games that day, as we always do, instead of the normal one at night. So it condenses everything even more for us, for those of us who have to do this fantasy stuff every week. We got 3 games to get ready for. First is at 12:30 Eastern. So we're going to switch up the format of this show today. Not going to run through the usual full slate game by game, but we're going to hit on some key players, try to answer some key questions here.
Well, let's do it. This week's always fun trying to fit, 6 days of work into 5. Math doesn't really work, but.
Right. Yeah. It's tough to complain too when people are like, seriously, I have to go to an actual office and do actual work. You guys are still playing. Thursday injury situations are, I think, going to be the first challenge this week because the players have less time to get ready to play, and we have less time to watch and see what's going to happen with them in practice and read the reports of what's going on. So I'm going to run through some players here that we need to watch before we set our lineups to begin the week on Thursday. Of course, Detroit has Jared Goff. Looks like he's trending toward returning to play this week. Limited practices the first 2 days this week. I'm guessing he plays. I know that doesn't matter for most fantasy lineups, but Jared, you know that there are some teams out there that have to start Jared Goff in like a 2 quarterback setup.
Yeah, sorry for those teams, but I do think Goff would make DeAndre Swift and TJ Hawkinson easier to trust in fantasy lineups.
Maybe Khalif Raymond if you have to look all the way down there.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, Chicago Bears on the other side of that one. Allen Robinson does not look like he's going to play. And, of course, we'll get game statuses for these guys later today. So maybe by the time you're listening to this, it won't actually be a question. It'll already be an answer. But looks like no Allen Robinson. I certainly wouldn't play him if he ends up active for the game somehow coming off the hamstring injury. Darnell Mooney has been limited this week, but he should play. He was limited by the same foot issue last week, and then he got 16 targets in that game.
Yeah, he's been limited much of the season, so I'm not worried about him. I think Mooney's a wide receiver 2 this week with the matchup and volume. And I think Cole Kmet gets a boost too with Robinson out again, even though it didn't, deliver for us last week. I do still think Kmet's in play as a lower end option this week.
Mm-hmm. Dallas has no Amari Cooper. He's out with COVID. CeeDee Lamb looks like he's probably not going to be back from his concussion in time to play in that game. They should, however, get left tackle Tyron Smith back. He put in a full practice Tuesday. And that would be, if he gets full playing time, it would be his first full game since week 5. Even that game against New England, he played 88% of the snaps, so slightly less than usual.
Yeah, Smith's return will be big. And Dallas has been much more efficient in the passing game and on the ground with Smith in the lineup versus without him. I don't know. Dallas keeps saying CeeDee Lamb has a chance to play that. I'd be shocked if a guy 4 days off concussion. But the concussions you can never really guess with them. They tend to be unpredictable. So we'll see. I mean, if Lamb ends up active, he's going to be a full go. So you're playing CeeDee Lamb if he's active.
I can tell you who would be skeptical of him getting back for Thursday's game is my wife, who works with concussion patients. But I guess I'm going to guess that the Cowboys know better than we do. And yeah, if CeeDee Lamb's playing, then we'll go ahead and play him. So we'll watch that Thursday. And, if it's a question leading up to the game, we'll certainly have the updates in the Shark Bites section to help you make sure that you have your lineup set appropriately. In the night game, we've got the Saints, who look like they will be without Alvin Kamara again, not practicing with his knee issue. As you said on the Thanksgiving DFS show, Jared, it seems like he probably had a setback last week based on what's going on.
Right, was limited last Wednesday, then didn't practice the final 2 days of the week and hasn't practiced yet this week. So I don't plan on Alvin Kamara playing. And then Mark Ingram's up in the air too after missing Tuesday's practice with the knee. So we'll get another update on him this afternoon. And Tony Jones is the guy who would step in as New Orleans lead back if Kamara and Ingram are out.
Tony Jones Jr., of course, his dad, is no longer on the Saints roster. The Bills, meanwhile, seem like they might get the healthiest Cole Beasley that they've had in weeks because he actually got marked down for a full practice on Wednesday, right?
Yeah, for the first time since he suffered that rib injury in week 8. And his playing time did trend back up last week, so not a surprise that he's closer to a full go. Matchup's pretty good against the Saints, who have struggled against slot guys. So I do think Beasley is back as an option in PPR leagues this week.
And the Bills already throw the ball in like 98% of offensive plays anyway, so they're going up against the number 1 defense in rush defense DVOA. I think I would boost Cole Beasley up our rankings now. I'd put him in like the 27 to 30 range at wide receiver, and I think he's a pretty strong option this week.
Yeah, I mean, the concern is his production hasn't been as big in games with Dawson Knox. But he has had some big games with Knox. It's just been more inconsistent. So that's the concern. He's not like a must play, but he's, to me, he was not an option last week with the rib thing. Now he's kind of back to where he was before the rib injury alongside Knox.
Yeah, certainly not a must, but he's in an offense where there's so much upside that in a range where everybody has questions, I would chase Cole Beasley's upside, especially with Dawson Knox facing a negative matchup for tight end scoring. So that's it for the Thursday injury situations. Obviously, we'll be keeping our usual eye on the Sunday injury guys and updating in Shark Bites throughout the week, including the game statuses as we get to the weekend. So it's a challenge for all of us this week with the 3 early games, trying to make sure we stay on top of roster management, but we'll be here to help you with that. We're going to move on to each position now and go through kind of some key players that might have questions, might have better than usual matchups, or just, issues that make them interesting this week. And we'll start at quarterback with Lamar Jackson, who of course was not in there for us last week, had the illness that got him questionable over the weekend. And then Tyler Huntley, of course, started in his place. So Lamar Jackson said Monday that he felt good. I'm going to go ahead and trust that means he'll be back at least close to usual Lamar Jackson this week. And judging by the fact that he's number 3 in our quarterback rankings, Jared, I'm going to guess that we're all going ahead and starting him.
Yeah, and it sounds like he was back on the practice field on Wednesday, so it should be good to go. Just, someone get this guy like a family pack of airborns or whatever, because Lamar is sick more than like any player in the NFL. I don't understand what's going on with it.
Yeah, maybe it's a dietary thing.
Something.
My only decision, I think, on Lamar Jackson this week is in this home league where I have him and Dak Prescott at quarterback. And I think I'm going to have to sit Dak and play Lamar there.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I'd play Dak is if you're just worried about Lamar not playing, and you obviously have to decide on Dak by Thursday. But, unless we get some report tonight that, Lamar is still iffy, I would definitely use Lamar over Dak this week.
Aaron Rodgers gave us the scary report heading into last Sunday that he had a toe injury that was actually going to be a problem for him. And then he went out and merely put up his biggest stat line of the season. So now, even after that, he's saying it's worse than turf toe, that he's probably going to need surgery on it at some point, right?
I don't know if I heard that. He actually said it's a side effect of COVID. So I won't get into the medical side, but yeah, like you said, he looked excellent last week. He even had that rollout touchdown. I think it was to DeGuara. So yeah, no concerns. It seems like he's hamming it up a little bit, like Big Ben style with this injury.
Yeah, you have to wonder if it's a side effect of COVID, according to doctors or according to Joe Rogan when it comes from Aaron Rodgers.
Right.
And the Rams, are a tougher defense, but they're also neutral in pass defense DVOA, so certainly not a worrisome spot after what we saw Rodgers do last week.
Yeah, I mean, last week was definitely the outlier for Rodgers' season. He's been more of a low-end quarterback one for most of the season, so that's what I'd expect this week. But if Rodgers is your guy, I wouldn't let the toe issue steer you away from him.
Dak Prescott, I mentioned I'll play Lamar Jackson over him this week, but he's still inside QB1 territory. When you don't have Amari Cooper and probably not CeeDee Lamb, or maybe not, I guess we should say at this point, it lowers the ceiling, but Dak Prescott's still been fine. I mentioned on our Thanksgiving DFS show, over the past 3 weeks when his numbers have been down, he's still ranked 11th in PFF passing grade over that span among 40 quarterbacks with at least 25 dropbacks. So his performance has still been fine overall. He's still a QB1 level play. The probably biggest question this week, just besides missing 2 big talents, is maybe Dallas leans more heavily on the run, missing those receivers in a game that they should be able to control however they want.
Yeah, I just think with the wide receiver issues, Dak goes from a mid-range quarterback one to a lower-end quarterback one this week. Vegas has played the pass pretty well, so it's not a great matchup. But I keep going back to Dallas has the highest implied total of the week, and by a pretty wide margin. It's a low-scoring week according to the implied totals, but 29.25 point implied total for Dallas. So Vegas expects Dallas to score. So Dak, even if the volume's down, he's capable of throwing 2 or 3 touchdowns in this matchup.
And I feel better about using Lamar Jackson over Dak Prescott because I also have my FFPC main event team where I have to start Dak Prescott, unless I feel like playing Matt Ryan, and I do not.
Nope.
Cam Newton was a question mark heading into last week as well, because Matt Rule said during the week that PJ Walker may be incorporated into the game plan. He played 0 snaps. So Matt Rule led us to believe that we should be hesitant with Cam Newton for absolutely no reason. I would still not completely trust Cam Newton as a fantasy prospect because there's still going to be passing downside, but I obviously feel better about him this week than I did this time last week.
I mean, if he's going to get 10 carries like he did last week, including some goal line stuff, and he didn't get his touchdown actually came from like 24 yards out last week on the ground. But I do think he's going to get some goal line work. The passing stuff is kind of just a bonus. So, Cam finished quarterback 4 last week in fantasy points. In his first start of the season after joining the team like a week earlier. So pretty impressive stuff. I think Cam is the best spot start option this week. If you don't have one of the locked in weekly starters, I think Cam's your best bet.
Yeah. Everywhere is goal line territory when you're Cam Newton. So there's still some risk, as I said to him, but he's right in front of Taylor Heineke, Derek Carr, Carson Wentz. So you let me know which of those guys doesn't carry some risk in your fantasy lineup.
Correct.
Russell Wilson will carry some risk if he's in your fantasy lineup. 10th among starters in PFF passing grade last week against Arizona. So that's the positive. Especially after finishing dead last the week before against Green Bay, still just 14 of 26 passing for 207 yards though, and took 4 sacks in that game against the Cardinals. So I would be shaky on using Russell Wilson this week if I were coming down to a decision between him and somebody else viable.
Yeah, and I went back this morning and watched the Seahawks offense in that game, and Russ still did not look good to me. And even looking at the PFF grade, it was 10th on the week, but it wasn't a good grade. It was still lower than all his grades before that finger injury. So still a concern that the matchup, though, Washington dead last in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. Like if there's a matchup to get him back on track, and the last two, Green Bay and Arizona, who Russ faced the last 2 weeks, are pretty solid defenses. So, I mean, if you have another quality option, you're definitely not using Russ over them. But most teams that have Russ, it's probably Russ or some fringy guy off the waiver wire. Now, we do have Heineke and Derek Carr and Carson Wentz and Tyrod Taylor. They're all ranked over Russell Wilson for us. I'm not sure I could use those guys over Russ though. I might just bank on Russ getting back to Russ form in this awesome matchup. There's obviously a risk, until we see him play better, get over the finger. I gotta think the finger is still an issue here.
Yeah, I would play all of those guys that you just named over him. I would play Jimmy Garoppolo over him this week. Matt Ryan would be probably the lowest where I'm not sure, and I think I'd probably lean Matt Ryan just until we see something, because there hasn't been enough. Okay, everything's good with Russ in this offense this year to make me feel good about betting on the rebound yet.
Yeah. I mean, Cam Newton's the one guy who might be available in your league that I would definitely play over Russell Wilson. Beyond that, it gets tricky.
I would rather get my Russell Wilson exposure this week by going ahead and playing Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, not at the same level as when everything's good in Seattle, but at a fairly comfortable level, like talking low wide receiver 2 to high wide receiver 3 territory. They got 50% of the Seattle targets between them last week, just like usual.
Right. I mean, Lockett went for over 100 yards last week, despite Wilson's struggles, and Metcalf was super close to scoring a touchdown. He just couldn't get his second foot in bounds. Yeah, those guys are still starters, obviously with added risk until Russ starts playing better.
Over to running back, A.J. Dillon had plenty of run in DFS last week. I'm sure he was in lots and lots of redraft lineups. So, Jared, did he disappoint by finishing just RB14? Like, you hear that number and think that's good, but if we're expecting a big week, RB14 is certainly lower than we would be happy with for Aaron Jones.
Yeah, well, I mean, that looks like his floor to me, based on the usage and how that game went. Green Bay fell way behind early, and that, Dillon only had 11 carries, and he was efficient. 11 carries for 53 yards, and I think most importantly, 6 catches for 44 yards. He ended up playing 75% of the offensive snaps. That's higher than Aaron Jones plays. Dillon's role right now is better than Aaron Jones's role when he's healthy and A.J. Dillon's healthy. So to me, again, RB14 feels like a floor for A.J. Dillon. I think he still has, top 5 upside this week. So, he should definitely be in your redraft lineup. And I think he'll be in play for DFS again this week too.
Yeah, you'd like to see more than 11 carries, but he got 73% of the running back carries for last week's Packers. And as you mentioned, the 6 targets, all 6 running back targets for the team. So that's even better than what Aaron Jones was getting when healthy. So yeah, I'm easily starting A.J. Dillon this week, and certainly he will be in the mix for DFS. The Broncos backfield, they're coming off a bye now, so we'll see exactly what they plan to do. But Jared, is there any reason to believe that there's something different than how we've been treating them to this point?
Hopefully. Javonte Williams outsnapped Melvin Gordon last time out for the first time since week 2, I believe it was. It's the second time this season. I'm not sure when the first was. It was early on. It had been a while. Javonte Williams also ran more routes than Melvin Gordon in that game. Now, I do think that there's in that game there were still kind of rotating series for the most part. But then Melvin Gordon lost a fumble. Lost that fumble in the fourth quarter, and it was almost all Javonte Williams after that. So we'll see if that continues coming out of the bye. I don't think they're gonna banish Melvin Gordon to the bench and it's gonna be all Javonte Williams. But I mean, I would not be surprised if it's like 60-40 in favor of the rookie coming off the bye. And you get this matchup against the Chargers. And, if you've listened to this podcast at all this year, you've probably heard us talk about the Chargers defense. It's a super run funnel defense. They're so much tougher against the pass than the run. Football Outsiders has them dead last in run defense. They're 23rd in adjusted points allowed through running backs. Teams run the ball against the Chargers at the highest rate in the NFL. So I think I would start Javonte Williams and be excited about it this week. And I think even Melvin Gordon is in play because this could be a spot where, those guys combine for 30, 35 carries.
Yeah, you'll find them still close together in our rankings. You'll find Javonte Williams a little bit ahead of them. I think that's how I would treat them. If you're deciding between them, I think it's certainly possible to start both of them. I mean, if you have to decide between them for one spot, it's still really a coin flip, but I think I would chase the higher upside rookie.
Yes, agreed.
We got some more backfields like that, but the 49ers backfield isn't quite to that point. Jeff Wilson also let people down, kind of like A.J. Dillon last week. Just 50 rushing yards, 1 catch for 8 yards, but 19-10 over Trey Sermon in carries and 40-24 lead in snaps played. So what do we make of this 49ers backfield now?
Well, I kind of expect Eli Mitchell to be back this week. Shanahan kept saying he thought he'd play last week coming off the finger surgery, but we'll see on that. I mean, I still think if Mitchell is healthy, he's the lead back. We saw that 2 games ago. Elijah Mitchell, 27 carries to Jeff Wilson's 10. I mean, they're not going to combine for 37 carries every game, but I think that type of split is what you're looking at. And if Mitchell remains out, I do still think it's Jeff Wilson as the lead guy. You're going to see Trey Sermon mix in. I think Jeff Wilson will be a good bet for 15 plus carries.
Yeah, Jeff Wilson is clearly the next guy after Eli Mitchell, but he's not as much the guy as Mitchell is when he's healthy. So that's the way to treat them going forward, I think. Patriots backfield, Ramondre Stevenson beat Damian Harris by 2 carries against the Falcons last week. Harris played 3 more snaps, and Brandon Bolden, even though he was questionable going into the game, was close to both of those guys. 17 snaps for Bolden versus Harris's 25, Stevenson's 22. Jared, how are we treating this Patriots backfield?
I mean, I think we're looking at a 3-man committee the rest of the way, like we saw last week. It was kind of a Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon situation. It looked like Harris and Stevenson were just rotating series, and then you had Brandon Bolden coming in an obvious passing situation. So, 3-man committee is usually a stay away, but this is a super run heavy Patriots offense. They're top 3 in situation neutral run rate over the past month. It's a good defense, so they're usually able to run quite a bit, and it's been an effective running game behind a good O-line, and Stevenson and Harris have both been running well. So it's going to be frustrating. Neither guy's going to hit ceiling games, I think, because of a split. But I do think you could get anywhere from 10 to 15 carries per game out of both of these guys, along with a target or two. So I do think they're both still in play as fantasy starters, lower end fantasy starters because of the split. But I do think it's a rare situation where it's a 3-man committee, but we can still invest in this backfield in fantasy.
I agree. There should be enough touches to go around. Relatively speaking, somebody's going to let you down by not scoring a touchdown, especially if the other guy does. But if you're choosing between Stevenson and Harris, it's really a coin flip. I mean, we could say Stevenson got more carries last week and he has looked explosive. Damian Harris hasn't been playing poorly, though. So it's not a matter of the rookie clearly working past an older guy. Harris is, 2 years older than he is. So make sure use either guy, consider them both usable, and don't trust anything too much. Of course, we're also just one more fumble away from Belichick losing Ramondre Stevenson's number.
Or Damian Harris's at this point. Who knows? Harris even ran a couple more routes than Stevenson last week. So I don't even think there's an edge there. I really think it's like 50-50. That's how I projected at this point as far as carries and targets are split between Harris and Stevenson.
Mm-hmm. Jared, we got a question real quick from YouTube, and it is start Myles Gaskin, Brandon Cooks, or Darrell Henderson in a flex spot in full PPR. Who you got among those 3?
Henderson for me, pretty easily.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would lean Henderson as well. I mean, I think both running backs are better bets for touches than Brandon Cooks, so I would start with both running backs over the wide receiver. And yeah, I guess I would have to bet on Darrell Henderson's situation and talent over Myles Gaskin here.
Yeah, Henderson's usage has remained strong. He's the clear lead back, and in an offense I expect to bounce back coming off the bye.
Speaking of bouncing back, we'll see if Tennessee can do that after losing to Houston last week. And the surprise there was Dontrell Hilliard coming out of nowhere to beat Adrian Peterson and Deontay Foreman in playing time. He basically did last week what Jeremy McNichols did in the first game after Derrick Henry's injury, and that was controlling the passing in a game where Tennessee did a lot of passing. But it was even more pronounced for Hilliard than it was for McNichols in the previous game. 51 snaps versus 15 apiece for Foreman and Adrian Peterson. And almost all of that came in the passing game. 38 routes, 5 pass blocking reps among those 51 snaps for Hilliard.
And the Titans, of course, played from behind Houston almost that entire game. And they were down multiple scores for a lot of that game. So I do think, at least as far as last week, it was a game script, game flow thing that got Hilliard on the field. Of course, we have Adrian Peterson out of the way now. Hilliard was also, the most efficient runner among those three guys last week too. So I don't know, maybe it changes and he's not just the change of pace guy. Maybe he does work in more on early downs. We'll have to see too, of course, if Jeremy McNichols is back this week after missing last week with a concussion. So it's a wait and see situation for me. Again, I think we've said that about the Titans backfield every week, and we still don't really know what it's going to look like. And you have the matchup against New England, one of the better defenses in the league right now. Titans have the lowest implied total of the week. They have a lower implied total than the Lions, lower than the Texans, lower than the Jets. So to me, I would try to avoid this backfield, and we'll reassess it next week. Maybe we'll have an answer then.
Yeah, it was interesting. Pro Football Focus graded Hilliard very poorly as a receiver and pass blocker for that game, and just kind of meh as a runner. So you don't really know what to believe there. And it's telling to me that the Titans then dumped Adrian Peterson the next day. So they had kind of been, waiting to do the thing that we all wondered about after his first game back. But, that says that they at least like Hilliard better than Peterson. McNichols, we'll see if he's back from the concussion protocol. I mean, he was Dontrell Hilliard first, and they were not having Hilliard involved in the game. So I guess among all of them, McNichols might be the top grab if he's available in leagues. I'm certainly not paying anything more than, free for any of these running backs, and I would prefer not to use any of them. But if you're desperate, there's a chance McNichols or Hilliard does something for you this week.
Yeah, this week the pass catching back is probably the best bet if you're having to dabble in the situation. I still, if I could stash one of them for me, it'd still be Foreman, just on the chance that he's now going to dominate early down work with Peterson out of the way. Maybe that means instead of 10 carries per game, he's getting 15 or 16 carries per game when the game flow for Tennessee allows it.
Yeah, just make sure you don't overtrust anything here. Treat it like a New England backfield.
Yep.
Philly's backfield got Miles Sanders back last week, and he reclaimed the carry lead in that game against New Orleans. 16 carries to 10 for Jordan Howard, 6 for Boston Scott. Of course, Jordan Howard left in the third quarter with a knee sprain. He's going to miss most likely at least this game, has a chance to play in week 13, according to Nick Sirianni.
Yeah, so Kenneth Gainwell should be active again this week, but I think you're going to see Miles Sanders and Boston Scott, active in air quotes. I think you're going to see Sanders and Boston Scott split most of the carries. Man, this Eagles running game is just rolling. I mean, they've been the run heaviest offense in the league over the past month now, and they've just been really good. I mean, that Saints defense they just played last week came into the game as I believe they were tops in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA, and the Eagles ran for 242 yards as a team on 4.8 yards per carry. Now they get the Giants, who are 30th in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA. So I expect a big game from Philly on the ground here. That includes Jalen Hurts, obviously, but I think Sanders, if we're projecting him for 60-65% of the running back carries, I think he's a strong play. And even Boston Scott, I think, could get 10 to 12 carries in this matchup and be someone you consider as a running back 3 or flex.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a tough decision for me between Boston Scott and any of the Titans running backs this week.
Oh, I'd go Scott over any of those guys.
Yeah, so you mentioned that New Orleans is tops in run defense DVOA. They still are right now, even after that big rushing day allowed to Philly. So that's how good the Saints have been in run defense overall. No reason to believe that Philly will swing way back in the other direction to pass heaviness as they were early in the season, and they shouldn't. I mean, clearly they're built to operate the way that they are currently on offense. So that's good for Miles Sanders' outlook. It certainly hurts that Jalen Hurts, no pun intended, is as involved on the ground as he is. 18 carries to lead the team last week with Sanders back, 3 rushing touchdowns. He's not going to score all of the rushing touchdowns, but he'll certainly, take plenty of them away. It's still a good situation for Sanders going forward, though.
Miles Sanders still hasn't scored yet this year, has he? It's coming. It's coming this week. I'm calling it.
He has fewer touchdowns than Andrew Thomas of the Giants. You mentioned the matchup for the Giants. They are the 6th best scoring matchup for running backs by adjusted fantasy points allowed. Even Ronald Jones scored a touchdown against them last week. That's how you know how weak they are.
Yeah, my Fournette teams were not happy about it.
Yeah, neither am mine. Jets backfield will wrap up this position as it should because there's nowhere to go but down from there. Michael Carter has made this backfield relevant for fantasy in recent weeks. I guess Mike White has really made it relevant as much as Michael Carter has. But now Michael Carter's dealing with a low-grade high ankle sprain, whatever exactly that means. Sounds like he's expected to miss 2 games. Has not been put on IR yet. So, it seems the Jets are hopeful it'll just be 2 games.
Yeah, we'll see. I think we can at least count Carter out for this week. So that's going to lead the backfield to Ty Johnson and Tevin Coleman. I went back and looked, the first 2 weeks of the season before Carter really got involved, and Coleman and Ty Johnson were both healthy. Ty Johnson actually outcarried Tevin Coleman 16-14 in those 2 games, and Johnson saw 3 targets to Tevin Coleman 0. So I'm kind of projecting them to split carries, but then Ty Johnson to handle most, maybe even all of the passing game work. Now we have Zach Wilson back in there, so I think the running back target share is going to crater, or at least, back towards like league average and not the 40% that we were getting from Mike White. But I do think 3 to 5 targets out of Ty Johnson plus 8 to 12 carries, and they get Houston, so the matchup's good. So I do think Ty Johnson is in play. Better bet in PPR leagues as a running back 3 or flex this week.
Who would you play between Ty Johnson and Boston Scott?
In non PPR, it'd be Scott for sure. I think in PPR, I would lean Ty Johnson. I think the touch projections are pretty similar. You're just probably going to get more passing game work out of Ty Johnson.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would probably end up leaning Ty Johnson across formats, but I certainly think that Boston Scott gains value without full PPR, and that Ty Johnson gains some value in full PPR. Yep. Over to wide receiver, we talked about the Seahawks wideouts playing DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett pretty easily. They have combined for targets on exactly half of the team's pass attempts for the season. That matched up with the target share that Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf combined for last week. Washington's best corner is Kendall Fuller, who could see some slot time when Tyler Lockett's in there. Fuller opened the season playing mostly in the slot, but has almost exclusively been outside the past 4 weeks. That led me to look at Tyler Lockett's numbers, though, and he has actually seen a lot less time in the slot this year than he has in other seasons. He is down to 40% of his time in the slot right now, down 20 percentage points versus last year. That is Tyler Lockett's lowest slot rate since 2016.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good matchup for both of these Seahawks wide receivers. Washington 27th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. No Chase Young, obviously, so maybe Russ has a bit of time back there to find these guys. So yeah, I think Metcalf and Lockett should both be in starting lineups.
Mm-hmm. Michael Gallup is going to be in starting lineups. 10 targets last week, 19.5 target share in 3 games back from injury. And of course, we've mentioned Amari Cooper is out. CeeDee Lamb is probably out. His target share probably even climbs against the Raiders. Michael Gallup's pretty comfy wide receiver 2 this week, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say wide receiver 2. Even if Lamb ends up playing tomorrow, I think you can still use Gallup as wide receiver 3 in that case.
Mm-hmm. Giants wide receivers, might we finally get Sterling Shepard back? That will be the question as we get into the practice week. And as we're talking now, we don't even have the first set of practice reports for the Sunday teams. But if we get Sterling Shepard back in this game, he's going to be my top bet among Giants wideouts.
Yeah, and Shepard was limited, Saturday? In their last practice last week, he was limited. Kadarius Toney did not practice today after leaving late in last week's game with a quad contusion. We haven't seen a game with Toney, Shepard, and Golladay all healthy yet this season. I'm not sure we're going to get it again this week, but the matchup does set up well for both Shepard and Toney. We've talked about the Eagles' pass defense kind of funneling stuff short. That's both where Kadarius Toney and Sterling Shepard have been working this season. So I think they're both lower end fantasy starters if their health checks out. And Kenny Golladay, he's almost droppable at this point. He is just not getting it done. It was a good spot for him on Monday night without Sterling Shepard, in a pass heavier game from the Giants, and he still did absolutely nothing.
It can't hurt Kenny Galladay that the Giants finally gave up on the Jason Garrett plan and fired him this week. They switched to Freddie Kitchens. Actually, have they actually made that, or is that still the guess that they go to Freddie Kitchens?
I saw Joe Judge say today, he's not revealing who's going to call plays in this game this weekend. So
of course, like that really matters. I mean, I guess at some level, the Eagles could go back and watch Freddie Kitchens tape from Cleveland and watch for tendencies, but it would still be a different team than what he has here. But anyway, that's how Joe Judge operates. I think the assumption is it's Freddie Kitchens. That seems like it would probably be the best case scenario for these Giants. I really don't know what the other options are. Freddie Kitchens, we might remember him from failing as Browns head coach, but before that, he had a tremendous half season as Browns OC that helped him land that job as Browns head coach.
Yeah, I mean, he can't be worse than Garrett. I'm also not expecting, Kitchens to spark the Giants offense and make this a unit we're super excited about. There's too many other issues, I think, beyond Jason Garrett.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not expecting to get excited about the Giants, but if you watch this team, the play calling is atrocious. I know that there was a Dan Orlovsky clip on Twitter where he showed the routes actually running 3 Giants receivers to the exact same spot on the field. We've seen Evan Engram get poor and short usage under Jason Garrett. So there's some talent here. There's some room for things to get, I guess, at least more favorable, more helpful to our fantasy lineups than they are currently.
Yep, agreed.
Jaguars wideouts will be without Jamal Agnew going forward after he suffered a season-ending hip injury last time out. And Jared, this might help unlock Laviska Shenault as slot receiver again.
Yeah, that's the big takeaway here. And I mean, Agnew does lead behind 6.3 targets over the last 6 games, so there's some volume to go around here. And then, getting Viska back in the slot. That's what I'm assuming. Last week after Agnew left, they used Laquan Treadwell on the outside and did move Shenault back in the slot. The other option would be keeping Shenault on the outside and getting Tavon Austin into the slot. So I can't even say it without laughing. But, so we'll see.
And when Tavon Austin played last time, he wasn't even in the slot for them. He was outside in that Cincinnati game, I believe it was.
All right, so there you go. So it should be Viska in the slot regardless. That's good news. I mean, I think that's where he needs to be to have a chance. I'm not going to go calling him locked in starter this week. I think ideally we just kind of see how it plays out and go from there. Marvin Jones should pick up some extra volume too. But Dan Arnold, I'd be fine going back to him despite last week's goose egg. That kind of stands as the outlier. He'd been seeing good volume in Jamal Agnew. I think Jamal Agnew especially, who had been doing a lot of short range stuff. A lot of that could go Dan Arnold's way now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it certainly should be helpful for Laviska Shenault. It should be helpful for Dan Arnold. They're all playing against the Falcons this week, so that's helpful to everybody involved. I agree. You don't want to trust too much in anything from Jacksonville for that matter, but it's at least a situation worth keeping in mind as we move toward DFS for the week. And if you're in a deep enough league where you're looking for wide receiver 4 level upside, there's certainly a chance that Laviska Shenault is helpful for your PPR lineup this week. If nothing else, these Jaguars have been good for, I remember that guy. Like it was Philip Dorsett in the preseason, now Laquan Treadwell, Tavon Austin. It's been an enjoyable offense to have around just for kind of chuckles.
Yeah, Carlos Hyde leads the whole, I remember that guy group, so it's been good. And Jacksonville plays Atlanta this week too, so the matchup is good for Viska and all these guys.
Yeah, by the way, Laviska Shenault's slot rate last week was his highest since week 4, which was the game where DJ Chark went down. So, we'll see what happens going forward, but it seems like maybe he'll get some more inside run now. Odell Beckham's going to round out the wide receivers. And what are we looking for from him with the Rams this week, Jared?
I mean, we still don't know. That's kind of the thing, right? I mean, he was super limited in his first game before the bye week. They targeted him on the first play of the game. He played quite a bit in the first 2 series, then he hardly played at all after that. He should be more comfortable in the offense coming off the bye. He should play a bigger role. Exactly how big a role that is, we don't know for sure. So he's just a risk reward play. I would not sit any comfortable locked in starters for Odell Beckham. But if you have an open spot and you're looking for someone, I do think Beckham has as much upside as anyone, outside the locked in starters.
Yeah, I would play him over guys like Laviska Shenault, Traquan Smith for the ultimate upside.
Me too.
Over at tight end, Kyle Pitts leads things off, and I have to wonder, should we worry about his fairly quiet past 4 weeks?
I mean, it's not ideal, but it's also tight end, so like you need another top 5 option to sit Kyle Pitts. I mean, I wasn't surprised he struggled against New England with no Ridley and no Cordell Patterson. Dwayne McFarland, their buddy Dwayne McFarland over at PFF had a good stat about how often New England double covered Kyle Pitts in that game. Not surprisingly, that Pitts was the focal point of the Patriots defense. Now he gets Jacksonville 27th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends, 30th in Football Outsiders tight end coverage rankings. Still no Kelvin Ridley, so the volume should be there for Pitts. We'll see if they get CPAT back. I think that would definitely help the offense. But Pitts to me is still a top 8, maybe even a top 5 tight end play this week.
Yeah, I mean, if you drafted Kyle Pitts, you had to know that you were doing so with a wide range of potential outcomes. You have to know that there's a wide range of weekly potential outcomes right now. So the other positive here is that Pitts has had 3 really bad games among his past 4. They came against the Patriots, the Saints, and the Panthers. The Patriots and Panthers are 2nd and 5th in pass defense DVOA, so pretty good in coverage right now. The Saints are 5th in tight end coverage DVOA, so they're doing a good job on that position. You can argue how much Kyle Pitts is a tight end versus a corner. Point is, those came against pretty good defenses, so it can happen for him like that anytime, but there's not as much reason to worry as there might be for some other guys coming off such a down stretch.
Yeah, I mean, he's still one of like 7 or 8 tight ends that you can kind of bank on, 6, 7 plus targets from.
Is Rob Gronkowski back to being one of those guys after plenty of time in his return Monday night?
Yeah, I mean, if Gronk is healthy, you're starting him. His weekly finishes in his 4 healthy games this season: tight end 1, tight end 3, tight end 17, tight end 9. And he gets the Colts this week, dead last in adjusted points allowed to tight end. So you're starting Gronk in season long. I think he's a top 5 tight end play this week. I also think he's someone to consider in DFS.
Should I worry that he is really hitting up USAA hard for insurance?
No, you shouldn't worry about that.
All right, because if an older guy, an aging football player, is that hard up for insurance where he's just fighting for it all the time, it just makes me wonder about his health. But we'll move on for now for Dalton Schultz. Speaking of insurance, some insurance for Dak Prescott this week. Rebounded from his week 10 for 8 targets, 6 catches last week. Now he gets Las Vegas, the 7th friendliest matchup for tight end scoring by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb. We don't know about Lamb, but they're probably out, both of them. Dalton Schultz is in a great spot for production this week.
Yeah, even if Lamb plays, I think Schultz is a tight end one this week. You mentioned the matchup. 8 targets for Schultz last week, 92% of the pass routes, which is an elite mark for tight ends. And, if Lamb is out, then Schultz, becomes a top 2 option in this passing game. So I think he's a pretty easy starter this week.
Yeah, and I don't even think it might not even be worse for him at all if CeeDee Lamb plays, because then there are 2 wideouts that the defense has to worry about going down the field as opposed to just Michael Gallup. So, yeah. Dalton Schultz is going to be strong no matter who is actually in or out for Dallas this game.
Agreed.
TJ Hawkinson had a similar rebound last week, also back to 6 catches, 8 targets with Tim Boyle at quarterback. So he's down right now, I think, from where we hoped he would be when we drafted him, just because the Lions are at least as bad as we all expected, but he's at least back to being a good bet among tight ends for targets.
Yeah, he's just developed into a floor play at tight end. Just the average depth of target is low, the yards per catch is low. He's not getting touchdown opportunities because this offense is so bad. But he's a strong target bet at the position. I guess now even if Boyle is in there tomorrow, we can feel okay about Hawkinson because Boyle still supported Hawkinson last week. So, he's just like a low upside tight end one, but someone who's going to give you a pretty nice floor compared to a lot of the other options at the position.
Yeah, he's probably got a lower ceiling than Dalton Schultz because of their respective offenses at this point, but there's also probably not anybody at tight end with a higher target ceiling other than maybe Darren Waller.
Yep, agreed.
Streamers at tight end, Jared, you got any favorites for somebody who doesn't have the option of playing any of these tight ends that we talked about already?
I mean, I don't know if Pat Freiermuth is available anywhere anymore, but I did want to mention him because Eric Ebron is going to miss potentially the rest of the season with that knee injury he suffered last week. And Freiermuth's route rates have been much better without Ebron. If you look at his Freiermuth's last 2 games without Ebron, 68% of the routes and 73% of the routes. The 2 games sandwiching those 2 with Ebron, 51 and 61% of the routes. So Freiermuth definitely gets a bump without Ebron. The volume has been there for Freiermuth regardless of Ebron's status, but it definitely helps with no Ebron. So I think Freiermuth is, a low-end tight end one going forward.
I think his end zone work has me favoring him over Dan Arnold the rest of the way, and similar roles for the two of them.
Yeah, that's tough. Like I feel, and it sounds obvious to say, it's probably stupid, but like if Freiermuth scores, he's going to outscore Dan Arnold. If he doesn't score, I'd bet on Dan Arnold outscoring him. So I do think Arnold still has the higher floor because of the volume, but Freiermuth is just playing well. Like man, how high are we going to rank him next year to be doing this as a rookie? I mean, we'll see who Pittsburgh has at quarterback. It's been a super impressive rookie season from Freiermuth.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see who the Pittsburgh quarterback is heading into next season. I think Austin Hooper is somebody who's probably even more available than Pat Freiermuth at this point. Gets Baltimore this week. The matchup hasn't been as good over the past couple weeks as previous, and I guess we could just blame Cole Kmet for that. But Austin Hooper has seen 12 targets over his past 2 games. He's had 3 games of 5+ targets and 4 receptions among his past 4 outings, 17.5% target share over that 4-game span. The Ravens are still allowing the 4th most PPR points per game to the position. They're 9th in adjusted fantasy points allowed, middle of the pack in tight end coverage DVOA. So they're certainly not a tough tight end defense at this point. And Hooper's just in kind of a similar situation to Dalton Schultz, where there are only that many guys around to challenge him for targets.
Yeah. Jarvis Landry is just super banged up. He hasn't been practicing through much of these past few weeks. I'm sure he's going to play on Sunday night, but he's not 100%. Donovan Peoples-Jones is still iffy with his groin injury. Anthony Schwartz missed last week with a concussion. So the Browns wide receiver core is just in shambles. So that, last week, Hooper had 7 targets. David Njoku had 4 targets. So the tight ends combined for 38% of Baker Mayfield's passes. I think you could see that continue going forward, especially in this matchup against Baltimore. So yeah, I like Hooper as a spot start option. And then even deeper down, I do think David Njoku, not as safe. I think Cooper's a better target bet at this point, but Njoku has that big playability.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else at tight end?
Nope, I just had those Browns guys as the top streamers beyond Freiermuth.
On the streaming defenses, looks like a pretty good week if you need to find somebody off the waiver wire to start in that spot. What do you like here?
Yeah, there's just a lot of bad offenses out there, right? Like, the Bears playing the Lions on Thanksgiving, I think, is a good bet. We've talked about starting defenses against Ben Roethlisberger, so the Bengals are in play. I think you could even consider the Texans this week if you want to get super gross, just in this matchup against Zach Wilson, who in Wilson's 5 full games this season, he's taken 3.6 sacks per game and thrown nearly 2 interceptions per game. So, Houston, not a good defense, but, Wilson has been giving to opposing defenses so far.
If you want to get super gross, there are probably better videos on YouTube for you to be watching than ours right now. But you mentioned the Bears. I was a little skeptical with them as a defense to begin the week, just because I don't know how well they have been playing overall. But then I looked, and they're coming off 2 straight strong performances, at least on the fantasy front. Obviously, last week they got Tyler Huntley as a starter for Baltimore. But then at Pittsburgh, the game before that was also a good outing for the Bears team defense. So when you combine that with matching up against the Lions and whichever dud they throw out there at quarterback this week, it's certainly a great spot, even if it doesn't end up working out. And one other, the Chargers are like on the fringe of our top 12. That's one that I would only go to if I really need to, if my only other options are bad, because the downside risk here is that where the Chargers are weak, and as Jared mentioned earlier, weakest, they're worst in the league against the run. That's where Denver's the strongest, and that's where they would like to keep the ball. So, there's a chance that the turnover potential of Teddy Bridgewater just doesn't come into play here. But it is a good matchup. Denver's 5th as a scoring matchup in terms of adjusted fantasy points allowed.
Yeah, you'll need the Chargers to jump out to a lead there and force Teddy Bridgewater to drop back. But there's definitely upside if that happens.
Mm-hmm. Any other defenses?
Nope.
That's going to do it for this Week 12 preview edition of the podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com now. You can see our full Week 12 rankings, find all the other tools that help you refine your roster and set your lineup each week. Check out our special Thanksgiving DFS podcast that Jared and I were just recorded this morning. That's available now. You can find our usual Friday DFS show, most likely coming later this week, probably Friday morning, but we're still working that out at this point with, this goofball week that we're all working through. As always, you can also hit us with questions anytime in the free Draft Sharks Discord. If you haven't joined that yet, you can find the link to do so in the description for this podcast, wherever you are taking it in. For Jared Smola and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.